Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. Blood matted into the sand long before the gates opened. Smoke from distant oil vats hung low across the arena, not thick enough to choke, just enough to sting. High above, curved rows of spectators sat in silence, eyes narrowed, breaths held, not for honor, not for justice, but for the thrill of what would be broken next. Metal groaned. The east gate split apart. One foot dragged slightly behind the other, favoring a bruised tendon wrapped too tight beneath leather. Shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the kind taught in pits, controlled, unremarkable, just enough to hide pain without denying it. Across the expanse, a row of ceremonial guards stood still as statues, crimson spears pressed to the ground like warnings dressed as formality. The crowd didn't cheer. Not yet. Not until the collar locked into place. 3 paces forward. A pause. Then another step, slower this time. Dust swirled around the legs as if the earth itself tried to pull him down. Every motion calculated, not from pride, but from exhaustion worn into habit. The kind earned when your name wasn't written, only spoken in bets and whispered in the halls of handlers. A soft crackle burst from overhead as a projection field snapped to life. Above, stretched across skyglass, an image resolved, shackles, knees against stone, back arched as if straining to stay upright. No scream. No fight. Just silence around the bones of royalty discarded. Her hair had been clean once. Not today. Grease clung to it in strands, silver dulled like tarnished metal. No jewelry on her neck, no sigils on her robe. Just the mark, burned into the skin beneath her collarbone, faintly glowing, still fresh. Guards lifted the javelins. Long shafts, black-hafted, sharpened not for efficiency, but for spectacle. Edges curved to catch flesh and hold it, not kill it outright. Meant to enter slowly. Meant to turn muscle into public theater. The announcer's voice didn't come. This part didn't need words. A mechanical hum pulsed from the walls, subtle enough to miss unless you'd stood in this pit before. It meant targeting systems were live. It meant someone in a high room was already locking sequence. The crowd leaned forward. Not to see if she would plead, but to see how still she would remain. She didn't move. In that frozen moment between tension and impact, eyes scanned her face, not for beauty, but for cracks. For grief. For that subtle tremble that came when nobility realized their lineage wouldn't shield them anymore. Nothing. No defiance, no regret. Just the calm of someone who had already been erased from history and simply hadn't died yet. Dust shifted behind the platform. It shouldn't have. No one noticed at first, not until a shout broke from one of the lower tiers. Not anger. Not joy. Confusion. Then another voice called out, followed by the unmistakable thud of boots hitting sand faster than protocol allowed. A body moved, not from the raised viewing balconies, not from the guards, but from the opposite end of the arena, where fighters entered, not royalty. Wounds still raw across the ribs, one eye half shut, gait uneven from too many unhealed fractures. No weapon in hand. No armor. Just forward momentum, and the locked gaze of someone who had seen enough death to know exactly how much time remained before those javelins struck flesh. He didn't shout. Didn't raise his arms. Just ran. Not fast. Not graceful. Not like heroes in legends. This was messy, stumbling, breath pulled ragged through bloody teeth. Each stride wrist collapsed. But the direction never wavered. Spectators stood. Some reached for recording lenses. Others simply stared. Not because it was noble. Because it was unapproved. Because it disrupted the performance. 2 guards stepped forward, unsure. Too late. The platform rose just as he reached it. 6 feet from impact, knees buckled. One last push off the toes. Contact. The javelins launched. 6 shafts fired in unison, drawn toward heat signatures and motion. The system recognized 2 targets. Calculations recalibrated. Trajectories shifted. Contact. Bone struck first. Then muscle tore. One blade pierced shoulder, Another tore through thigh. He didn't scream. He folded around her body like instinct, arms drawn in tight, head low, back exposed. Blood hit stone before silence broke. Someone in the control booth killed the sequence. One javelin still hovered midair, caught between glitch and override. Around the arena, no one moved. No orders shouted. No medics ran forward. She reached out, slowly, as if unsure what she was allowed to touch. Fingers brushed a cheek smeared with dust and warm, pulsing red. His breath shuddered. Not from pain, but from release. Above them, the projection dimmed. Across every screen, the image froze. Kneeling outcast. Bleeding fighter. No crowns. No emblems. Just two bodies tangled in defiance of a law written for performance, not survival. Still, she didn't speak. Not yet. His mouth was dry long before the blood loss. Not from fear. Not even from pain. The air itself seemed wrong, soaked in too many eyes watching, too many mouths waiting for a reason to forget what they were. Stone beneath his feet had warmed under the sun's weight, just enough to remind him he was still alive. But only barely. She didn't flinch. That was what broke him first. Not the shackles. Not the guards flanking her with their ornamental spears, painted to match robes worn by those who'd never stepped onto this sand. It was her stillness. Chin lifted by an invisible pride, gaze unmoved, spine straight despite bruises blooming across shoulders that had once held ceremonial silk. One eye swollen shut, ribs sharp beneath torn skin, he watched her. She didn't blink. Metal shifted beside her, groaning from hydraulic tension loaded into launch rigs beneath the platform. Someone above approved the sequence. Someone in a seat too far removed from consequence had given the nod. 6 beams locked onto her frame. Angles calculated for symmetry. Blood but elegant. Breath shortened. He didn't plan. No strategy whispered itself into his ear. No voice from his past rose up to offer courage. Only a single step forward, heel dragging slightly behind as bone ground against old fracture. Another step, then another. No one moved to stop him. Not at first. He wasn't supposed to matter. 2 guards noticed too late. Their grips tightened, but orders hadn't changed. No call had been made. No rule allowed interference before signal launch. So they hesitated. He didn't. The sand gave beneath his final push. Muscles screamed, not from pain, but from remembering what it meant to sprint. Arms pulled in tight. Eyes locked forward. Just reach her. Just cover her. Nothing else. Time didn't slow. That's a lie told by those who've never had a weapon find bone. It sped up. It blurred. The hum of locked energy launched 6 projectiles across 50 meters with precision engineered for display. Audiences liked symmetry. One hit first, tearing through the left shoulder near the joint. It didn't stop him. Another found the thigh, slicing clean through the side of the quadricep. Still forward. The third hit low in the back, near the kidney. That one dropped him. Not immediately. He staggered into her, knees collapsing as his arms wrapped around her waist. Weight buckled both of them to the ground. Dust rose. Her hands instinctively caught his ribs, fingers slipping in blood already soaking through leather. A sharp inhale. Not his. Hers. She didn't cry out. Just held him, unsure what parts of him still held together. He pulled tighter, spine curled over her frame, chest shielding hers as if instinct had built a shell from muscle, from will alone. Around them, silence held. No cheers. No orders. No motion from guards who suddenly had no training for this. He wasn't supposed to do that. Humans didn't interrupt imperial executions. Not for outcasts. Not for exiled bloodlines. Certainly not for former princesses sentenced for refusing a sacred mating bond. He wasn't supposed to see her, let alone leap. But he had. And now 3 holes poured life onto sand while a woman too highborn to cry watched red stain her hands. She didn't whisper his name. Didn't say anything. Only pressed her forehead to his, letting their breath mix between cracked lip. Her eyes burned, not with rage, but with memory. Something had returned. Not power. Not vengeance. Recognition. Somewhere high above, an alarm failed to sound. Somewhere just beyond the wall, boots started to move. Orders scrambled. Chains loosened. No one knew what to call this. No law written for a gladiator choosing a dying princess over freedom. So no one moved. Not yet. Not until she rose. Flesh pressed to stone, breath shallow, blood thick beneath trembling limbs. Around them, footsteps struck too cleanly to belong to spectators. Not running. Sweeping. A containment pattern already forming, mechanical boots dispersing through lower corridors like cold fingers searching for heat. Delay would mean capture. Capture would mean spectacle, rewritten. Metal at her wrists hissed apart. No keys. No commands. Just a slight twitch of her thumb against the base of her palm, where a thin line pulsed once beneath skin. Hidden from every scan, embedded years before exile. One chance. Never tested. It worked. She didn't speak. Didn't waste sound. Arms slid under his shoulders, not gently, not cruelly, just with urgency drawn from years of watching others die slower. Legs braced, the weight of him folded over her spine. She stood. Every step smeared his blood behind them. They moved through the eastern wall, past the ceremonial torch mounts and display columns. One slot held no flame, only shadow. She pressed into it, shoulder first, letting the false panel yield. Inside, a maintenance chute too narrow for armor and too steep for hesitation. She dropped. He followed, dragged half-limp behind, boots scraping steel. Below, no arena. No sky. Only sewage heat, bio-waste ducts humming against walls soaked in runoff from the upper tiers. The air burned differently here. Chemical. Sharp. Pipes rattled overhead, some still warm from overflow release. Rats didn't live here. Not even the ones bred for war. She moved through it with purpose carved from memory. Twice she paused. Once to listen for pursuit, once to check if his breath still caught in his chest. Shallow. Intermittent. Mouth slack. Head tilting with each jolt of motion. She kept going. A left turn at the rusted valve with imperial crest. Down 4 more paces. Another right where mold climbed wall tiles in stripe. Through a hatch whose handle broke off 2 years prior, still broken. Behind that, quiet. Not silence. Just the kind of quiet that warned of too much steel and not enough life. He collapsed onto the concrete, bones hitting first, blood pooling faster than gravity should allow. Eyes open, but not seeing. Lips moved. No sound. His fingers twitched, not toward her, but toward something not here. Her hands searched his side. One wound near the ribs. Deep. Arterial. Another along the thigh, less clean, bone possibly grazed. The shoulder, shattered. Nothing sterile. No tools. She stripped fabric from her own robe, tore it into lengths, pressed it hard to the open hole. No reaction. No flinch. Skin pale, lips losing color. She cursed, not loudly, not for drama, just enough to remind herself that time hadn't stopped. She needed fire. She broke the seal on a nearby wall panel. Inside, a discarded torch rod, partially drained, barely sparking. Fingers shook once before contact. She bit into her own arm to keep quiet as flame caught the metal. A moment. She didn't wait for readiness. The rod hissed against his wound, cauterizing in seconds. He twitched once, body arching, mouth wide in a silent cry. Breath returned, short, rattled, but present. She moved to the next wound. More blood. More fire. By the third seal, he didn't move at all. Not resistance. Not acceptance. Just loss. She pressed her forehead to his chest, counted seconds. Chest rose. Barely. Her hand found his. Not gently. Not like a lover. Like someone clinging to the last anchor in a collapsing corridor. The ducks above moaned. Not random. Traced footstep. They hadn't lost the trail. But he was alive. Barely. She would keep him that way. Even if she had to drag his body through every drainage path beneath a kingdom that forgot she existed. Light didn't reach the lower quadrants. Not real light. The glow here came from cracked panels, from runoff current bled into dead consoles, from residue that shimmered on walls where coolant once flowed. Wind didn't move. Air thickened by time hung unmoved, as though even breath needed permission. The satellite hadn't spoken in years. Its transmissions silenced after the market's collapse. One by one, embassies closed, docking bays sealed, gravity systems downgraded to ration mode. What remained wasn't population. It was survival. They found shelter behind a cargo vault marked obsolete in 5 languages. Floor warped. Ceiling wept in places where insulation failed. No one patrolled here. No one traded. The kind of place where silence wasn't safety. It was the price of being forgotten. He healed slower than expected. Movement returned, first in his fingers, then through his shoulders. Pain stayed. Scar tissue thickened where metal entered muscle. Sleep arrived in fragments. He never asked where she'd gone each time she returned with ration cubes and chemical cloth. He understood the currency. She waited. Not patiently. Not gently. Just long enough for him to stand without support. One morning passed without bleeding. That was enough. She stripped the vault bare. Cleared space. Marked positions in dust. Not for weapons. For posture. For movement. For presence. He watched. No words. Not at first. She moved through forms once reserved for diplomat. Not warriors. The turn of a shoulder. The exact tilt of the chin. Each motion calculated, not for beauty, but for effect. A certain distance between the knees. A particular delay in eye contact. Long enough to be noticed. Not long enough to be questioned. He didn't laugh. Didn't smirk. Just watched. She approached. Hands guided his shoulders. Adjusted his stance. Tilted his face one angle left, then down. Less expression. More mystery. Her fingers brushed his jaw. Not affection. Calibration. This was court training, not affection. Her voice finally came. Low. Uninflected. Stripped of elegance. Attraction wasn't about beauty. Power wasn't about force. Those who controlled the narrative controlled the outcome. Royalty learned that young. Seduction was a tool sharpened before any blade. He listened. Not because he believed her. Because her eyes didn't ask him to. They moved together through pattern sets. She adjusted his gait. Corrected how he held tension in his neck. Taught him the pause between breath and reply. He failed. Again. Again. Each mistake earned a correction. Sometimes a touch. Sometimes a stare that held too long. A hand on his chest. A mouth too close to his ear. Heat not from lust, but from power exchanged without threat. One night she stood behind him. Told him to speak without speaking. He didn't know what that meant. She pressed herself to his back. Now they did. She guided his hand across her hip, over the curve of her spine. Not for pleasure. For practice. Each inch taught a message. Ownership without touch. Desire without need. He breathed too loud. She reminded him silence was seduction's first command. No sound. No rush. Only intention. The next morning, she handed him a robe once worn by attendants to second-tier consorts. Pale blue. No insignia. Bare at the throat. He wore it. Not because it fit. Because it marked the start of something neither of them could name. In the satellite's dead corridors, no mirrors remained. Only scraps of reflective paneling. Enough to watch how he moved. How she observed. She didn't praise. Didn't need to. He no longer walked like a weapon. He walked like a question no one dared answer. That was enough. For now. She held the blade like it might sing. Thumb ran across the flat side, not to test the edge but to feel how clean it had been kept. That mattered to him. Not the kill. The precision. His lesson didn't begin with target. It began with pressure. Not how much to apply, but where. Between ribs. Beneath jaw. Through clavicle. Techniques passed down not by generals, but by slaves forced to win wars so their owners could claim titles. She asked no questions. He gave no warnings. Her first attempt failed. Wrist turned too slow. Grip too tight. He caught her forearm mid-strike, twisted just enough to drop her to the ground. No bruise. Just shame. No apology. Just another attempt. On the seventh try, she landed it. No celebration. Just movement. He took her into lower city zones where currency came in secrets, not coin. She watched him strip weapons from men 3 times his size with no expression. Quick. Unfelt. No glory. She stopped flinching after that. Information came through touches that lasted too long. Phrases wrapped in compliment. Eye contact held through silences designed to feel accidental. She led nobles to pleasure halls carved into asteroid chambers, walls coated in gold paint that peeled if you breathed too hard. She whispered false names. He sat in corners, masked as servant, watching for movement behind curtains, watching for guards who blinked too much. Every conversation fed them coordinates, access glyphs, surveillance paths. Some came willingly. Most believed they'd seduced her. Only one noticed too late. The diplomat from House Yari kept trophies from every court he bedded. Rings, earring tips, language samples recorded in low-frequency charms. She left his body in the bath. Water pinked around his throat. No weapon found. The bounty on her name disappeared within hours. Records scrubbed from the outer ring node near Station Ilari. She taught him to smile without warmth. He taught her to breathe through her feet when the kill came close. Together they moved through courtrooms like shadows dipped in perfume. Each step taken like it belonged. Blood dried faster when the wound was silent. A merchant prince offered safe passage. Required payment in favors. She danced with his guards for 3 nights. Never kissed him. Whispered a single name into his ear during his final drink. He died 3 hours later, mouth open, hands clawing at a non-existent lover. Medical logs sealed. Their ship left under false codes provided by the heir to a dead archive. Nothing burned in public. Not yet. Only in silence. Only in corridors too narrow for retreat. One by one, their enemies forgot how to sleep. At each new port, they discarded names like old clothing, wore new robes, adopted new scars. She marked her collarbone with a ring of red pigment. He wore leather across his shoulders like armor from a dead world. Those who remembered her exile called her mad. Those who met her eyes twice called her consort. None survived long enough to compare the two. The gates of the core didn't open with ceremony. They hissed, low and mechanical, like something old being forced awake. No trumpets, no names called. Just the soft hum of clearance codes rewriting themselves as doors folded back. The court didn't recognize them. Not immediately. Too many years passed. Too many faces cycled through ranks of forgettable aristocracy. The ones who mattered had already died or vanished into their own scandals. But those who noticed subtlety, the way her jaw no longer tensed in hesitation, the way his shoulders never once bowed in deference, they watched too long. Her hair coiled into tight spirals now, dyed in silver with ends dipped in cobalt. A crest marked her collar in mineral paint, not family. Not blood. Just precision. His robe bore no insignia, but fabric that fine didn't belong to mercenaries. Boots polished to reflect the floor beneath, silent with every step. They walked 3 paces apart. Close enough to suggest unity. Distant enough to preserve tension. Eyes met theirs, then looked away. The ones who didn't look away tried to place him. Tried to recall where that face belonged. The tilt of the head. The scar near the cheekbone. They never said anything. Not aloud. She smiled rarely. When she did, conversation stalled. The room changed temperature. Not fear. Not attraction. Recognition without confirmation. Whispers followed them through outer chambers. The kind only spread when security protocols failed to silence curiosity. The word consort carried weight here. So did exile. But no one dared ask why those 2 words now walked in the same breath. They were given quarters meant for visiting nobles. The guards posted outside rotated every 2 hours. No one admitted they were being watched. No one denied it, either. In private meetings, she spoke with precision. Only when it mattered. Every syllable laced with tone pulled from old dialects, the kind used by nobles who studied off-world, who wore education like armor. She never mentioned lineage. Never referenced the fall. Her silence on her own past made it louder. He stood behind her. Never beside. Never seated. Always watching. Not the room. The exit. No one recalled a name, but a servant swore she'd seen him in the blood pits. Not as a guest. As spectacle. The rumor died quickly. But not before it reached the ear of a visiting minister from the 3rd District. That minister's ship malfunctioned hours later. Docking clamps released prematurely. Fire licked through half the lower engine corridor before containment systems kicked in. He didn't return. No one mentioned it at dinner. At court gatherings, her gowns cut sharp across her waist, with shoulders exposed just enough to draw attention upward. Every piece designed to whisper control. He wore dark tones. Always the same material. The cut never changed. He looked like he might have worn it into combat, and maybe he had. They didn't flirt. They occupied space. It was more threatening. The high families sent feelers. Inquiries cloaked as invitations. She attended none. He responded to none. That refusal carried more influence than any acceptance. Old enemies began to ask questions. Too quietly. No formal charges. Just hesitations in the hallway. Slips in posture when they passed. Questions not spoken, but weighed in glances exchanged across banquet tables. The court shifted without announcement. Not in laws. In presence. They weren't asking for power. But power noticed them anyway. No names were spoken at the gate. Masks did the introductions. Enamel, bone, silver, each carved to resemble a predator extinct before the Empire ever reached the outer systems. Her mask bore the sweeping curve of a desert jackal. His, obsidian black with no mouth. No symbol marked their arrival, no herald announced their names. They were let in anyway. Music coiled through the ballroom like smoke, played on instruments only the inner court remembered how to tune. Dresses swept floors untouched by dirt. Robes layered in jewel tones swirled against mirrors built not to reflect, but to distort. No one danced for joy. They moved to be seen. She stood beside the wine tower. He took 3 paces to her left, scanning movement instead of melody. Every noble present wore status like scent, too strong, too rehearsed, always paired with a lie. He appeared near midnight. The air. Mask cast in white alloy. Eyes rimmed with gold. He didn't speak to her. Not immediately. He waited until she moved past him on purpose, brushed her wrist against his sleeve, paused just long enough for memory to tighten around his throat. No words. Not yet. Only posture. Only the fact that she had returned, and his reach had never extended far enough to keep her. She held a glass in her left hand. The right stayed hidden beneath the folds of her sleeve. He noticed. He always noticed the wrong things. 2 cups waited on the table. He didn't reach for either. Not until she turned her back. The air never liked to follow. So he chose the one nearest her. She smiled once, faint. His favorite concubine arrived late. Glitter rimmed her eyes, silver traced her arms in patterns that meant submission. But tonight, her gaze landed on someone else. He found her near the second balcony. Didn't touch her. Didn't speak. Only looked. Long enough for her to tilt her head. Long enough for her to forget who brought her. When he finally leaned in, she whispered something about feathers. Something about cold hand. Something about forgetting where she was. No one noticed when she left with him. They vanished behind the second archway. The air searched for her an hour later, drink half finished, tongue slow. She met him there. The woman who once knelt for execution. No mask. He reached for his cup again. She watched. 2 more sips. He tried to speak. Mouth formed vowels with no consonant. Eyes rolled once. Hand reached toward her wrist. She stepped back. The glass slipped from his grip. Shattered before it landed. No one screamed. This was a court. Reactions were reserved for commoners. Guards moved. Not toward her. Toward the sound. She turned. Found him waiting. Mask gone. Smile low. No blood drawn. No weapon unsheathed. But by morning, the heir had forgotten how to speak his own name. The concubine whispered another's into her sleep. And the court, for the first time in 2 decades, stopped asking questions aloud. Smoke lingered low across the outer courts, not from battle, but from rituals long denied. Banners that once hung from obsidian arches lay trampled in silence. No horns. No parades. The empire had not crowned a victor. It had lost its voice. She stood in the high chamber without guards, without attendants, bare shoulders framed by robes that no longer carried crest or chain. Behind her, the chair meant for bloodline rulers remained untouched. She did not sit. He entered without announcement. No one blocked his path. The walls themselves seemed to step back. Their eyes met without question. Too much had already been said through pain. No words passed between them. She reached for the box resting on the pedestal, opened it without ceremony. Inside a blade. Short. Dull along the sides, polished along its spine. Not built to cut. Built to burn. Its hilt carried etching from a time before translations, symbols only her house remembered how to shape. He removed his robe without hesitation. Scars lined his torso, each one left behind by systems designed to humiliate. None covered the space above his heart. That space waited. She approached slowly. One hand on the blade, the other closing around a vial of dust the color of rusted bronze. She smeared it across the metal. Flame touched it for only a breath. Smoke rose once. He didn't flinch. Not when she placed her palm against his chest. Not when the blade kissed flesh. Not when the mark took shape. A curved line, broken twice at its center, intersected by a downward spike. Not art. Not decoration. The symbol of a house that once turned its own daughter into a prisoner. She pressed harder. The skin beneath hissed. Blood rose, not in streaks but in beads, held back by the heat. His hand gripped the edge of the pedestal, white-knuckled, silent. She withdrew the blade. He stepped back. The mark pulsed once, then faded to a deep, angry red. No praise followed. No touch. Only her eyes on his chest. Not pride. Not love. Recognition. This was not a gift. Not an apology. Not a reward. It was record. That a human, dragged from the dirt, had walked through the veins of a dying empire and left his print in blood. He remained shirtless. The wound still hot. She turned away first. Not to dismiss him. To let him stay. No songs marked the shift. No announcements declared the transfer. Couriers still ran between towers. Market gates still creaked open before dawn. Ships docked. Systems blinked. Orders continued to move through channels no longer claimed by the old seal. Power didn't collapse. It reassembled. He stood at the window of a hall that once overlooked executions. The floor had been scrubbed, but the stain at the far corner resisted solvent. No one tried again. Too many things had been hidden already. One truth could stay. The mark on his chest had scabbed by morning. Skin around it darkened, raised with uneven pressure. Breathing pulled at the edges. Every step reminded him what she had done. Not in malice. Not in apology. Just to make sure it wouldn't disappear. She didn't check on the wound. She didn't touch it. She passed him in silence, once at the basin, once near the northern chamber where petitions gathered. No nod. No lingering glance. They weren't pretending not to care. There was simply nothing left to say. Outside, statues were being pulled from their pedestals. Not smashed. Not revered. Just removed. Left to lie in storage rooms until someone remembered why they were ever built. New names began appearing on the council rosters. Not all were noble. Some bore no title, no legacy. Just result. The kind that left stains behind the curtain and credits in accounts that didn't trace back to imperial code. In quiet chambers, his presence shifted the weight of conversations. No one called him advisor. No one dared say consort. Yet they turned to him first when judgment was unclear. Some argued it wasn't lawful. Others remembered the blood that bought his place. Scars are hard to debate. He no longer wore armor, no longer carried a blade. But those who passed him in the corridor moved with precision. Not out of fear, out of understanding. This was a man who had knelt for no title, had bled for no crown, had asked for nothing and survived everything. She walked beside him once during a procession meant to replace the old banners. Robes brushed, but their hands never touched. A minister leaned in, asked if they would be formally bonded. Her gaze froze him in place. No answer followed. The question wasn't repeated. No rings passed between them. No ceremonies etched into record. Yet he remained. Not as decoration. Not as memory. As proof that a man without name, without station, without permission, had entered the center of power and remained upright. The mark still burned. Not as pain. As warning. He had not conquered. He had endured. And every mark carved into his skin had been worth the moment. He looked across the court, saw her unmoved in the seat once meant for cowards, and knew he belonged. Not below. Beside.